So the last talk is from Peter Davies, who's conveniently here. I am going to read out Peter's bio. He's a security expert operating in the Convergence of Safety and Security, honorary fellow with Imperial College Institute of Security, Science and Technology, and chair of the ASIN Security Workstream. Leading an expert in countering cyber attacks, targeted supply chain infiltration, and cyber physical attacks. He's led the cybersecurity aspects of 2 CCAV research activities, 30 plus years of verifying security systems and hardware software. Peter likes to say he does security. I would agree with that, where it can't afford to fail. Peter is sought after for his advice in organisations and legal position and respect to cyber attacks. So that's Peter, and Peter, I believe you're going to take us through verification in the face of cyber attacks.
I am. Thank you very much. I have quite a short time to speak, so if you want to hear a full day on this, you need to come to the ASIN Security Workstream meeting on the 10th of July. Okay, I've done the plug. Yeah, that good. I'm going to leave that because it's mostly been read anyway, so I don't need to do those things. So what I'll speak about, problems with existing V&V practices, that sort of stuff, how they might be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So trying to encourage you to think about those things. Looking at the fact that whereas the systems we used to rely on were actually small-scale ones, we did really tiny little things that we could do. Unfortunately, now what we're trying to do is get effects from scale. Yeah, so if you look at the automotive system, that's its basic problem going forward. So I'll talk through those sorts of things. I put up a picture of a gate because that's in Ashdown Forest. So now you can see that with all the bits burnt down around it, but the gate's still there. And it does exactly the same thing, namely nothing, because there's a gate with no fence. And that's pretty much what we seem to do with a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do. So I'm trying to do that as a way that you might look at it. These are the sorts of things I like to discuss. What does a legally sustainable through-life cyber argument look like in the context of a safety case? That seems to me to be quite an important thing. When I end up in court, that'll be important. As I keep saying to people, I'm quite close to retirement and I'm looking forward to a real good career as an expert witness. The resilience equation, I'll try and talk about that. And what does type approval? So I do automotive. So what does it actually mean when you're talking about these sorts of things? So I think that's a really important thing to start looking at. This is my justification. This is what I think cybersafe is. I used to get it on 3 lines, but because I squeezed it in with the pictures here, it has to go on to 4, I'm afraid. But this is what I think you're looking at on the cars. So when you're talking about these things, you're talking about the car 2 in front of you being the one that causes the problem, that causes me to crash. The insurance industry is actually quite keen that I react on the basis that there might be a pedestrian I'm about to run into, because it's much better that I do that than I run into it, even if it turns out that 9 times out of 10 that wasn't true. Yeah, that is still cheaper than running into it on the 10th occasion. So you've got those sorts of things. You've got satellites. You've got gantries above motorways. You've got Stuxnet attached to your traffic light bits. You've got training data sets in machine learning algorithms. This is what you're looking at. I was interested on the news possibly yesterday to hear people talking about how they're going to be charging up the grid from their cars in this island off Madeira and all the rest of the stuff, which is exactly what we said. You've got a completely connected stuff, and we have already connected this stuff up. Yeah, there isn't at some point in the future we're going to do so. So I'd like you to think about that. I have invited my automotive colleagues to consider that they might like to do Ford Anglias, and they've said that doesn't look like a viable way forward, and the government's not very keen on it. So this is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at conflicting objectives. I've tried to give you 3 there. Is it something I can get money out of? Is it private? Is it safe? They're not necessarily the same objective. I might want to encrypt things to make it private. I might not want to encrypt things in order to be able to make it safe. And in court, I need to be in a position to say, what is my position? You know, what have I done? If you're trying to make a safety case, I might want to be in a position to say that my peers agree that we should do the same thing, not that they think we should do something different. Imagine being there and saying it takes 10 seconds to reacquire situational awareness in a car, and have Audi go, no, according to my study, it's 22 seconds. And having an academic theory that underpins this is actually pretty important that goes with this, because if you can't substantiate those, you're probably going to jail. Oh, no, sorry, that's the wrong thing. you may not be making the right arguments. That was the one. Cyber attacks against the automotive system, just trying to go through. So this is trying to define what it is. It's a connected and autonomous cars as part of a complex, hyper-connected, bottom-up system. You know we do safety by doing top-down. That's actually what we're not doing. Emergent properties, 95% of the value of the economy is based on emergent properties. It would not be a good idea to get rid of this, and there's no guiding mind. I don't get to go to somebody and say, would you mind designing the automotive system for me? I'd like it to look like this. I have no idea where to go for that sort of stuff. And that bottom point there, I think, is quite an important one. These attacks in triggering our own defences create situations where we're weakened, but actually you're looking at things where effectively you're doing your own defences against you. So this isn't necessarily failures. What you're talking about is a system that is a complex system and is teetering on the edge of failure the whole time. You're just talking about how you make it fail. And as a cyber attacker, I've got an infinite choice of things to do. This I put up there just merely to try and get people to think about these things. I normally put up castles, and because I'm from THALES, I normally put up the Maginot Line there as well, just to encourage people to realise that we haven't really had a good track record of being successful by putting we'll defend the trusted core things together. It doesn't work in the Middle Ages, hasn't worked anywhere. And if you go through and imagine all this stuff of if you've architected, coded it and analysed, which is what we're encouraging people to do, will it therefore be cyber safe? I guess I'll ask you the question. Does that mean it'll be cyber safe if you do it all properly? Do you have some concept by which this will become cyber safe? Show of hands. Yes? Excellent. Nobody? Well, that's odd though, because actually what we're doing is taking cars and putting cars out there that we believe we got to take to court because actually we've already got this problem. You're not looking at something in the future. This is where we are. You're not talking about automatic cars. You're talking about things that are connected internally. So let me talk about some of this. The engineering V is not enough. We actually went through, been discussing the time to execute the engineering V tends to 0. This concept of time being something that's actually critical. So how often do you think the connected automatic, the auto infrastructure updates? Any ideas? Suggestions? Nope. Once every 10 microseconds.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, all right. But thank you, yes. Currently, once every 10 microseconds. So do you believe you can go through a V&V process once every 10 microseconds? So presumably, you either believe you don't need to do it or something. So it's really interesting to people talking about how they've tested it, they've been through the validation, we've got type approval on this stuff, and then magically we'll patch it going forward. Well, because it was okay not to do any of the stuff after. Even though it's quite clear that any changes at all have consequences that may be far-reaching. So we do have this thing that while the engineering V remains useful for bounded subsystems, we need an additional design method that can adapt to real-time operation. So I'm pleased to say that my colleagues in looking at this were pleased to recognise the edge case where the engineering V didn't work. So we had pretty universal agreement about that. Would anybody care to hazard a guess about what percentage we started with where the engineering V didn't apply? About 2%. That's where we started. Would anybody like to hazard a guess where we've got to after 4 months of discussion? About 2% where it does apply. Well, that's pretty radical. This is a pretty incendiary comment. What you're basically saying is in 2% of the cases, we are doing a job that we actually know what we're doing. And in 98% of the cases, we're putting together stuff that we have no idea why it will give you any justifiable confidence in a good outcome. That seems to me to be quite a significant statement for somebody to be making. A lot of money. I'd like to do an example here of breaking the brakes. We started by talking about brakes, obviously. If you're familiar with ISO 2626, how many of us? 2? Yeah, ASIL-D is I've got replicated components, I've got cross-checking. That's what we do when we do brakes, but the brakes are now digital. You saw the picture of the Jeep. I take my case from this. So if we look at these sorts of things, you're in a situation in which the brakes, the steering, the acceleration, they're all put together. You can control all of those. In the case of a modern car with an ABS system, you've got individual sensors on each of the wheels working out and making sure that you brake correctly over a wide area distributed network inside your car. You're accelerating some of the wheels so that you don't, and you're even steering to make sure you don't skid. In addition to that, if you look at a really recent car, you've got 80-mile-an-hour emergency braking, which based on a sensor that figured out that somewhere ahead of you're about to crash into something, is applying the brakes. And none of this has anything to do with whether I'm pressing the brakes or not. It's making these decisions autonomously. So if you look at that, as it stands at the moment, that's approximately 23 sensors: acceleration, brake, steering, a data fusion component, machine learning algorithms that are augmenting most of the sensors. That is your ASIL-D thing. I have no idea how to do that. That's about 2.5 million lines of code with all of those sorts of things. That is apparently something that somebody is justifying as an ASIL-D. And I understand completely because we haven't actually given them any other tools. But this is a complex system way beyond anything that could be there. And that observation at the bottom, the control system that is supposed to be a really simple control system that kicks in to say, you know, it's all gone wrong, we need to do something, the functional system's not working. It's so much more complex than the functional system that it can't possibly be something that's operating in the way it was intended to. We've been using this as an example to try and work through with people, what is it you're actually doing? To try and explain, whatever else it is, you are not doing what you say. And that's a really important thing. Because when I get serious about this stuff, you actually need to have numbers, you need to have ways of proving things. So what we tried to do was put together an overall methodology. Something that suggests that actually the important thing is operation. The Auto Council helped me redraw that so that it was in this form. And essentially what it's saying is, I need to be able to monitor, simulate and deploy. I need to be able to understand against an infinite set of cyber attacks that could take place, which are specialist examples of emergent properties, so we say, and which take place outside of your model. So I think Mr. Gödel in the 19th century did that one. You've got an infinite set of these things, how that all works together. You are not talking about something where the fact I found another 3 cyber attacks, witness Mr. Maple's previous talk, means that I made any dent at all on the types of ways in which you could be attacked. So you're in a thing where you're concluding that I am going to be successfully attacked. Trying to work around the idea of how am I going to stop that happening appears to be something that is doomed to failure. We're taking time to do that and encouraging our attackers because we're giving them a really fixed surface to actually attack against. So this is where we tried to work towards. I tried to give you some definitions here. We tried to put up a resilience, these are mine, patent, pending, all that kind of stuff. But no, these are here in case they're of use to you. We tried to put up a resilience equation to try and get people to look at these things in a different way. So we need this stuff to be resilient. It's got to survive for 30 years. It can't just collapse after 2 years and we go, oh, that was a shame. We don't have that option. So we looked at what we do, what we can insure, and what the public authority, the third party, is prepared to cover as a residual risk. So when I get it completely wrong, there will be a catastrophic failure every now and again, and the public authority has to accept that. How often are they prepared for that to happen? I can insure 10,000 deaths a year. I might not like 10,000 deaths a year, but I could insure 10,000 deaths a year. And that will give you a number of what actually you're trying to achieve as an engineering outcome, which essentially is what we do must achieve that. And they're numbers. You must achieve those numbers. Regulation. You might have listened to people talking about standards and regulation. So this is my definition of regulation. It's a mechanism by which liability is transferred between regulators and those subject. So if you listen to all this discussion about Facebook and all the rest, I'm not hearing any willingness on the part of our public authorities to say, I'm going to cut the IT industry slack here. We're going to take the blame when the crashes take place. They're kind of encouraging us to believe it's our fault if we do things we don't know how to do. So I think this is a really important thing because you need to start to think about what regulation is. So I hear people talking about regulating for simulation, regulating for why? Why would the public authority do that? We have to have substance behind what we're talking about. Standards, we do a lot of standards. I've got 3 pages of standards, and yet I've got a user community going, I can't operationalize this. None of these things happen. You know, will you stop standardizing things you don't know how to do? So instead of that, I've tried to talk about legally sustainable standards. Those are the ones, as I say, that have essentially got a proper academic basis behind them, that actually you know what you're doing. You can define it. We have to stop doing standards that don't have that kind of background, because you are going to end up in court. In fact, I have the Chief Justice of Northern Ireland discussing how can you do a public interest prosecution at the moment. This is what we tried to do. How do we get the maths to support this? We tried to do a basic picture. This is very simplified, I appreciate. And basically what this is trying to say is at some point, something will happen. You have to detect it. You have to understand it. You have to act on it. If you don't do so by the end of the time T there, it will cascade to catastrophe, by which I mean it'll get to a point where you can't control it anymore. We don't know what that T is. You know, I know that for diseases. I know that for flu. I know that for all sorts of things. We don't know any of those sorts of things. So we don't have some of the underpinning research that we need around those things. But the speculation here, the suggestion here is this, if you like, is rephrasing some of that resilience equation that we put up previously, or that I put up previously. I apologise for using slightly different terms. That's because I took these out of slightly different things. But this is where we've got to. I have to again thank my colleagues in the Automotive Council. This is stuff that they are looking to promote. So 3 principles: increase the probability of detection, increase the number of engineered differences. That's the bit I worry about. So when we do V&V, we pretty much try and make everything the same. But what they're concluding on the ways they're looking at these things is, if I actually do everything that I need to based on detecting, understanding and acting, I'm around 43%. Which means I've got around 67% of my events are actually going to result in catastrophic failures, which is an unacceptably high number, I'm told. And therefore, what they're saying is one of the tools we have to play with is how many differences you have, how much significant difference you put in this system. So they're starting to say we deliberately need to engineer difference into these systems, not have it all the same. Monocultures will fail catastrophically. That is absolutely the opposite of what we seem to have been doing for the last 50 years. So they need to know about time. Time has become a really big consideration. So this idea of probability of understanding, rate of deploying mitigating actions, the time for a threat to propagate, the quantity of engineered difference, and the frequency of proactive update. So the idea that you're actually updating stuff the whole time in order to change where things are. I don't buy castles, I buy things that move. You know, if I want to do something, I need to move the attack surface. These are important things when we're considering what V&V needs to look like going forward. The two things we need to stop doing. See this? Stop doing. The common supply chain. We need to get difference into these sorts of things. This is a really important thing that you're talking about. You know, it was an important observation that when we looked at key stores, there were approximately 2 worldwide. That was interesting, you know. So the ability to cause a catastrophic failure based on attacking that component was huge. The other thing that we're looking at, regulatory framework, must actually look at dynamic environments, not static ones. You know, it must consider that this is a once every 10 microseconds update that you're looking at, and therefore look around those sorts of things. See, I've got to a final slide. I have to thank my colleagues from ACIN who have worked really hard. And actually, this is way too short a thing on this one. What we've actually got to is a point where we believe we've got the basis of maths that we can put behind the claims that you're making in relation to that. And that, to me, is really, really important. That basis of maths is not based around I am measuring this individual failure or that individual failure. It's based around these curves here are exponential curves. You are at 43% or you're at 53%, and understanding those things, and therefore understanding when you have done as much as you possibly can, and there's no point in spending any more money. And having done that, to reason about, and therefore what must the rest of your system look like? There's an observation that you're not looking at things where things are going wrong because you've been an idiot and done it wrong. You're looking at fundamental conflicts in your systems. You've got Renault making a decision that's just marginally different from Ford and creating a tension between the two. It's not unexpected. And in fact, if you did it the other way, you'd have a single thing that was actually looking for a catastrophic failure. So it's to be desired that you have those sorts of things. My friends from the Automotive Council, as I say, have been very kind in putting these things, and Zemzik have contributed to putting these things as well. So thank you very much. I am prepared to answer a question.
This is about the regulation aspect. So if you look at ISO 26262, for example,
26262, yes.
Unlike, I don't know, the 0254 and the avionic industry where there are, approvals and things like that, ISO 262 is kind of going that, right? It's basically, my understanding is that in a court of law, you have to demonstrate that you use state-of-the-art techniques, and ISO 262 demonstrates something, or let's say, doing some statements on what is state-of-the-art, but I don't know, Tesla is cheap, is not done according to ISO 262 as far as I know. So, do you think there should be, like bodies that really, like in the avionic industry, that actually certify real certification of, for example, hardware software systems, which is not done at home in automotive?
So I don't believe there should be. I think if you look at, you're going to have you've got much more dynamic threats that are emerging across this stuff. But in as much as there are bodies that would certify, you need to certify that people are operating at the right place in relation to understanding of the threat, operating the right way around those sorts of things. That they're at the right point on those curves, that their calculations are correct. The testing of whether it went wrong or not is when you have accidents, when you have those sorts of things, you'll take that to court. You need a justifiable reason. And as you said, the interesting thing on 26262, as compared to some of the other regulated standards that you have in relation to that, it is not that it's state of the art, because many things are state of the art, and yet are wrong. 26262 is actually, and has been, particularly with electromechanical systems, a good way of doing things that is agreed, and effectively has an underpinning in theory of why that's why you can take it to court. And the fact you can take other ways to court because people have done things in slightly different ways, they still meet much the same sort of underpinnings that go with that. They just meet it in slightly different ways. Your issue here is once you start talking about cyber attacks and you start talking about 55% of your value on an individual vehicle is digital, and you start talking about how connected all of this stuff is, that way of actually joining things up and being able to make calculations needs a different academic underpinning, hasn't got it at the moment. That aspect of working out what you're going to do in order to get that is not a matter of being state of the art. It's a matter of actually having truth and something that sits behind that.
Every new Ford, then, you suspect every new Ford will come with a functional safety expert in the back as well as a security expert.
So you'll have noted that I managed not to mention security as we went along here. I talk about resilience. I talk about the fact that things are doing what you expect when you expect them. Yeah, and I talk about the techniques that you might use in order to achieve that. I don't see safety as different than security if your security is impacting. So and in fact, in many ways, I think security is a term that is causing far more confusion than benefit. So very often, for instance, I get people believing that security is synonymous with encryption or synonymous with whatever their particular mechanism is that goes with this stuff. Yeah, these are only as good as the use you make of them. They are not an end in themselves. I don't need to encrypt things. And I certainly may not want to encrypt things in a safety sense. So I think at the moment we need to find a way to get away from talking. Yeah, I have security in my job title, and I have security in the name of the company, but I thoroughly recommend we get away from talking about security and start talking about the certainty that we will achieve our outcomes, and therefore understanding things and being able to talk about things in a much more realistic way. And I do not believe that there is any legislation that requires that the guy that goes to court for a safety case is required to explain that he did security. On the other hand, I do believe that not able to go, it was safe except for the cyber bits. Or at least and not expect not to go to jail for that.
I'm watching the time here. I think we're a little bit over, no, thank you. But I think I'm sure people still need to answer questions. And anything else that people want to ask, please do. If you want to get more into this, come along 10th of July. So Peter will be running the conference.
Come along to where?
And PC answer part. So we can the details. Send that link or to our card or Peter's card if you'd like to see them. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.